understanding part. Yeah, sorry, it says map, understand, map the problem, understand everything about it. That's what today's focus is going to be about. In the classic 5-day design sprint, this is usually the first day. And this is the day when everyone wants to align, understand the problem deeply, understand the goals, understand the sprint questions. What are we really going to sprint about? Make a map of the business or the area that you're targeting, and find a focus area to really work on and say, okay, this is the stakeholder we want to focus on, and this is the part of the map that we're really going to focus on and answer our sprint questions for. So yeah, any first thoughts on this first day? Does anyone have any thoughts on, what is most important for you when you're doing the first day of the sprint? If anyone feels like sharing. How about you, Julia? What is the one most important thing that you're looking to get out of the first day of a sprint?
Well, I guess having clarity what the problem to solve is, or is that something we did last time, like the problem?
We did that last time.
Because
yeah, that's why we talked it separately. You can also do this here, and you will get more clarity about the problem for sure. But that's why we tried to separate it and said, okay, let's do problem framing, get a clear idea of the problem, and then go into the sprint saying, okay, this is what we want to work on.
So basically, what we did last time in a classic sprint, it's before the sprint, and then we come up with a how might we question. Is that correct? Like one or several?
So in the classic sprint, they don't do any problem framing at all.
So, but they start with a problem, or with
they start with the day one. So the assumption is on the first day, you'll get all the right people into the room, you'll get clarity about the problem, and you'll already frame the problem in a certain way on the first day.
Okay.
So the interesting part about the classic sprint is also one thing that we should remember. It was developed and created with startups in mind. So what applies to startups sometimes does not apply to all other organizations. So in the classic sprint, this is the format that they have, what you see on screen. They start with the long-term goals and then ask the sprint questions, and then create the map and ask the experts, which are basically the team members in the room or other people within or outside the organization who could have all possible information or knowledge. Then you collect how might we's from them, and also maybe try to sync them on the map, and finally pick a target. So this is what is usually done. And this is not the only way to do it. So there are multiple ways to do it. And if you talk to many people running sprints, they'll have their own flavor of how they run the first day. So it's up to you how you want to frame it, how you want to structure it. And today I want to share with you what I usually do. So this is my way of running the understand part of the sprint. And that's why I'm also sharing, this is the classic version, and I will slightly differ a little bit from that, but I'll still have most of those elements there. And if time permits, we'll also take a look today at 2 other activities or exercises that might be interesting in the context of understanding the problems or understanding everything on the first day. And another shout out about our guest for the day today. It's Benedict from the Morph company. He's from the HPI school. So he's a trained design thinker and also knows the sprints. He's worked with the sprints in multiple situations. And he can bring his input and experience when it comes to empathizing. So how do you empathize with people? How do you get more input on problems by deploying this empathy? That's what we're going to also look at today. So one more on that note, let's get started. But another quick hint, as we said last time, we're recording this for our purposes to look back and also to share if someone is missing this session. If you feel you don't want to be on camera, just feel free to switch off your video, and that's going to be okay. I'm just giving you a heads up there. Let me share the Miro board link again for other people who've joined a little bit late. And we'll jump right in. So 3 things to look out for when you're doing, hi Sachin, nice to see you. Share my screen again. So 3 important things are, so here I'm assuming the role of the person running the sprint, the facilitator's role. And these are 3 things that are very important for me. So one is I try to start at the end, which means I already try to think about, oh, what could be potential ideas or areas or places we would land with the sprint solutions, or what domain is it roughly aiming for. Another thing to keep in mind is nobody knows everything. So as the facilitator, it's your job usually to sort of get it out of the right people. Sometimes those people are not even in the sprint team. They're not in the room. They're probably somewhere outside. So you just need to be aware of that. And as much as possible, keep thinking about reframing problems as opportunities. So every time you hear someone in the sprint team from the client, for example, talking about, oh, you know what, when I tried to do this, this didn't work. They're talking about a problem. So at that moment, what you can do, or also encourage the people participating in the sprint to do, is instantly turn it into a how might we question. And this can be a little bit weird because we don't talk like that. We don't talk in how might we's, but it's a very good skill to have. And the more you do how might we's, the better you get at it. It's not the first times you might suck a little bit, but think about, listen very carefully to problems that people are talking about, encourage them to also take notes as how might we's. I've also dedicated a complete section to just capturing how might we's in the way I run the understand section, and yeah, see how much you can capture out of that. So what we'll be looking at is, I also thought it'll be interesting to have a slightly different problem. We looked at this problem of a traveler the last time around. And this time I felt we're all looking at the vaccination thing, right? Everyone wants to get vaccinated. So you're a citizen somewhere, you want to get vaccinated, but it takes a hell long time because you don't know what's happening. You don't have enough information. You don't know more about the vaccine. You don't know what the process is, etc. And that's also very frustrating because you have to dig through multiple layers. You have to take many decisions. This is not an easy job, and everyone has their own opinion. So who's right or who's wrong, we don't know. So I thought there are 4 key factors that contributes to that, and maybe this is something we can explore as we do the activities. And maybe this is also something that helps us get a little bit clarity about vaccination and stuff. So I felt there are 4 friction areas. So there's awareness. You don't know usually what it's about. Where do you find the most detailed or validated information? What's it about? That's a very tough one. Consideration is the next one. Do you really need it? What about your personal history? How do you feel about really getting it or not? Trust. Will this really help me after you get it? We don't know about the long-term effects, honestly, but in the short term, we know that this is something that all of us need if we have to stop the pandemic. The 4th one is delivery. So where, how do you get a slot? How do you make sure that you really get the right thing? And does it suit your age group? Does it suit your conditions, your all the health profiles that you have? So these are some factors that I felt that were important. And we could take this as sort of the problem area, and that could be the problem statement. And let me quickly show you what are the elements of the understand section that I look at. So I'm looking at the long-term goal. So, oops, sorry about that. So you have the long-term goal, say, I don't know, 2 years down the line, how will things work? So here you're trying to be very optimistic, you're being positive, and you're saying in 2 years, what could possibly happen? Then I'm quickly going a little bit short term in the present, in the now. I'm trying to understand what could go wrong. What are the problems? What are the frustrations? What are the issues? What are all the pessimistic sides of things that could go wrong? Then I'm trying to capture how might we by asking experts. So here, that's why I've created, for example, 9 different fields. I'm assuming I'm talking to 9 different people. I'm trying to be a sort of investigator reporter, as the notes instructions that I've given here also say. So I'm basically interviewing the sprint team and guests outside to understand all possible things about this problem area that we're looking at. So that's the third activity. And the fourth activity that I do is from there, collect, organize, and prioritize the how might we's. So we've captured a lot of how might we's by talking to a lot of people. That needs to be categorized, that needs to be clustered, that needs to be organized. From there, I move on to what I call note and map. So this is basically the same as mapping. There's nothing very different. So this is the typical map you must have seen in the sprint book also, where you have the stakeholders on the left, you have the end goal towards the far right, and you also have all the steps that they need to take in between. But doing the map is very complex. It scares people a lot. It's messy. Don't try to do it from scratch in a sprint session with the sprint team, because it'll take you ages and you'll still not reach a point where you have a halfway sensible map. Instead, what I can suggest is there are multiple ways of doing this, of course, but my way is literally to have these conversations with people about the map before the sprint starts and make a sort of first version of the map already before I come into the session. And then what I do is ask participants of the sprint team to create their own version of a sequence. So starting from, okay, if they know a particular user, if they know a particular goal, what are the steps that need to be taken from their point of view? So everyone individually writes down just their sequence. And then what we do, we take all of these sequences, stack them up one on top of the other so that you have everybody's sequence. Then we mix and match, move things around, and make sure that we arrive at one instance of the map. So this I've seen to be much more participatory. Everyone participates. Everyone is then able to give their version of what they feel the map needs to address. And again, here are 3 things that I'm looking for there when I'm doing this mapping. Before you start the mapping part, or you tell the people in the sprint team to work on their individual versions, these 3 things should be clear. Who's the target client or user? Is there a certain stakeholder they want to focus on, or is there more than one of them? When does this experience begin? So they need to come from their perspective and say, okay, for example, let's say we take this map and we see that the first step of this experience starts by making an appointment through the website. So that's when it really starts. So sometimes you will have alignment. Well, people will say, oh, this is the start. We can all agree on it right away. Sometimes that will not be the case. Everyone will come and say, oh, I have a different starting point. But that's okay. Let them come with that. And finally, also ask them, what is the goal that we're trying to reach? Same case, sometimes there will be clarity that says, okay, we all want to make sure that a patient gets selected into a trial or manages to choose a particular trial. Sometimes they won't even know. So you need to maybe guide them through that process. So let's try this out. But before I go there, this is the overview of the understand session that I usually use. Any questions at this point? Any thoughts, comments, or concerns? How about a quick round of sharing?
Yeah, Rakesh, when we do this sprint question,
yeah,
after long-term goal, we do this sprint question. Yeah. The sprint question is depend on the long-term goal or in general. So how do you do that? Or what kind of sprint question? So what's the difference between, because sometimes there is a confusion between how might be and the sprint question. Mm-hmm. How you generally distinguish those two pointers?
So the way I start with the long-term goals and the sprint questions are, I tell them, I first ask, say, the decider or the team leader or the CEO, whoever it is, to give us an overview of two things. One is, where is the company right now? Where is the organization? And what is this particular area or challenge that we are dealing with? So once this person sort of sets the stage, then I go in and say, okay, long-term goals, think back about what your decider or CEO said, think about both where the organization is right now and this particular challenge that you're dealing with. Mostly they'll quickly adapt and start focusing on just the challenge that needs to be done. But I personally find it a little helpful to also keep this in the back of your mind about where are we as an organization right now? Because there are lots of organizations that are in a sort of growth phase. If you take scale-ups, for example, they're growing rapidly. And sometimes just keeping that one factor in mind allows them to unlock a lot of other ideas or a lot of other information that they normally would not share. So that would be my distinction.
How about sprint questions?
The same. So I tell them, okay, now you wear your pessimistic hat. You're looking at all things that can go wrong in the present for this particular area, for the area of, let's say, vaccination, but also keep in mind the context where you are. So where are you as a team, as a group, as an organization? That would be the second thing to keep in mind, but really think about what are all the things that could go wrong when we deal with the question how to vaccinate. Okay. As an example. Yeah, does that help? Cool. Any other questions, any other thoughts, or anything where you say, hey, this is totally Greek, I'm not getting it, please feel free to share. This is the chance, and I'm very happy to see how we can run through that. Yeah, I see another hand go up.
Sure. Hi.
Goli,
my name is Goli. Yes, and my first session here. Hey. So a quick question. I'm actually involved in a research project which includes a lot of stakeholders in the nursing program for this school and institution for the nurse students that are planning to apply for the placement clinical site. Mm-hmm. And they have kind of disabilities. Mm-hmm. So for this project, we are having a charrette design, which mm-hmm. probably looks similar to this sprint. Mm-hmm. The challenge that we have is kind of how do we involve all the stakeholders, the practicum people, the students from very, very diverse background and knowledge base into these kind of challenges, and how do we set goal for them in order to come up with some solutions that is applicable to the entire system design or service design.
So I'm hearing, Goli, what you're saying is how do we create the sprint team, more or less, right? And how do we make sure everyone is represented in that?
Yes, and how do we design some activities that everybody kind of engages? Mm-hmm. Because the ultimate goal, we want to enhance the accessibility of the accommodation process.
Okay. So
from a different perspective.
I can take the second question first. How do you engage everyone? The sprint method is perfect to engage exactly a diverse or interdisciplinary set of people when you're solving a complex problem. So you have the activities lined out in the method. It's up to you to just pick and choose, or you can just go with the classic version and say, okay, let's just do stuff one after the other. That's the easy part. The tougher part is getting the right team together. So in the book and the classic sprint, what it says is not more than 7 to 8 people, because that's when you'll have enough time for people to share, and the size of the group is easier to handle. And if you have more than that, it becomes very difficult because everyone is talking or everyone is sharing. But now that we are all working from home, now that things are more virtual, I feel it's actually possible. So you can have, you can try to categorize the different stakeholders that you have into, say, students, nurses, people working at the clinic, admin staff, or patients. I don't know, there could be multiple categories, and you can try to recruit people from each of these categories. And you can again
in separate and individual groups, students together, the other people together, or
no.
kind of diverse setting?
No, diverse, interdisciplinary, and a heterogeneous mix is what makes the magic happen.
Awesome.
So try to get at least one person from each group. And even if that's not possible, you can mix it up in the sense where you say, hey, let's keep the people who really need to be in the sprint and who need to constantly, share. Maybe you can just do the testing with the students later. That's another way of approaching it. But heterogeneity, super important. If you go for homogeneous groups, you'll only get the same idea that you started with. You won't move too forward. At least that's what I've seen. Does that answer your question, Goli?
That does, and I'm sure during the workshop today, I'm gonna gain more as well. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much.
Anytime. Okay, so any other questions, or if not, we can jump right in and try things out. So let's do that. So let's get into the Miro board, and let me share it again. Share screen. So as I said, let's imagine that the problem statement is it's about a citizen who wants to get vaccinated and understands that these are the different issues or challenges that go in the face of it. And the statement clearly says, okay, I'm a citizen and I'm trying to get vaccinated, but it takes a long time and I'm not sure, what to do because there are too many unknown questions. It's really frustrating me. So what could the long-term goals be here? So can I invite you to the long-term goal section? And can you start writing post-its here and complete the sentence in 2 years' time? What's going to really work? And here, remember, you're optimistic, you're positive, you're thinking things are going to work out. So use that mindset. So what will happen in 2 years' time? So, oh yeah, Kohli, I think we shared the link. Let me share it again. Here you go. Yeah, nice. In 2 years, every citizen should be vaccinated. Perfect. So you see a few more post-its coming up there. Zoom in. Everyone vaccinated and therefore travel behavior back to normal. Yes, that has both fortunate and unfortunate sides to it. Let's hope there is at least a minimal change there. So we have a concept that suits every pandemic in the future. Yes, very good. Preparing really for the future. That is very forward thinking. In 2 years' time, citizens will be well informed. About vaccinations. Okay, wonderful. So this is really the first step. So you're trying to collect the long-term goal. And if you have multiple statements or you have a large team, then make sure that you get them to vote. We won't do that here because we're just short on time. But can I just say the long-term goal is, say, in 2 years, we want to be sure every citizen is vaccinated and we are better prepared for the future. So that's something that helps people understand this is the long-term goal. Let's again now quickly move to the short-term or the sprint. Now, pessimistic hat, think problems, think challenges, think all the things that could go wrong. So complete the sentence, can we do something? And for example, can we build trust with new customers? Or can we still live up to, I don't know, 80 despite having had a new kind of vaccine or something like that? I don't know. So go for it. And there's also a psychological angle here that I notice when I'm doing this. It's always good to start with the positive. So people don't start looking at the dark sides right away. There could be a lot of teams that have gone through a lot of problems and are really waiting to share a lot of that or just vent that. Sometimes they don't get that opportunity. So just starting with the positive, optimistic side can be much nicer than starting with the pessimistic side. Yes, that's good. Can we make sure everyone will be healthy after vaccination? Yes, very good. Can we make sure that everyone will get it? Yes, access to that. Hygiene while vaccinating and making sure that the right process is followed, the right vaccines are given. There's so many things that could go wrong there. And another thing to look out for here would be there will be a tendency for people to start talking about their fears. This is also something very human. So given the time, look at it. It's an individual choice as a facilitator. You can either, if you sense that there is a lot that people have gone through and there needs to be some space for sharing, give them the space. So although the sprint really describes that, yeah, you can go from one activity to the other. Yes, you can totally do that. But I find that that's very context specific. So depending on the team that you're working with, sometimes they might need some more additional space to talk about things, even if after they've finished writing it. Yeah, can we make sure that everyone gets immunity? Yeah, well, can't be just that, yeah, there's no surety that vaccination gives you immunity also. Who's ready to work in offices? Can we get everyone to get enough awareness? The mix of vaccines, yeah, that's right. And here we'll be looking at the biggest risks. So each one gets 2 votes. You'll vote on the biggest risks. And what we'll do is we'll always take these risks, the top risks, and the long-term goal along. So what you can do is always be mindful about copying this. And once you've identified which are the top 2 risks here, 2 or 3 maybe, I'm just going to just take a few randomly. What helps me is just changing their color. So changing the color to black makes them easy to identify on such a board. And everyone can come back to that when they're feeling lost or when they feel that, are we really on track? Are we following that right direction? So here, this is, we've done the long-term and the short-term goals, easy, super simple. Let's move on. Ask the interviews, ask the experts, sorry. Here, we don't have the experts, so we don't have the time. I mean, given the short introduction that we're doing here, I would suggest why don't we directly go and collect as many how might we's as possible? So let's collect as many how might we's as possible here in this area. Let me also copy it for you so that you have them. And let's try to cluster them. I think this is the best thing we can do. So a little bit of history on how might we's. If you haven't done this before, what we're trying to do is simply reframe a problem. So with the how might we's, you're first thinking of, oh, what are all possible problems that this vaccination challenge poses? Then if you keep thinking of problems, you'll actually only go in search of more problems. That's again a very human thing. But instead, if you reframe it, if you convert it into a how might we question, it's easy to go look for answers. So that's exactly what we do here. Think about all possible how might we's. Think of all possible things in this vaccination process and frame it as a how might we question. So again, let me bring these elements for you to help you. These are things that we're looking at. So that's more or less the problem statement. So this is what we're looking at. So you can think about even problems in awareness, problems in consideration, problems in trust, problems in delivery. Those could be sort of leading categories you can already imagine. And if you remember, we just set the long-term goal. In 2 years, we want to be sure that everyone in the world is, say, vaccinated. So try to come up with as many how might we's as possible. Quantity means a lot now. So let's also take a few minutes to do that. Set the timer. Or if you have questions or if you feel stuck, give me a shout. We can clarify that. And don't worry here about not getting the how might we right at the first shot. Just write whatever comes to mind, as many as possible, because you'll see when you cluster that most of them get formed into different categories on their own. Yeah, good ones. How might we trust the effectiveness? How might we make sure nobody gets side effects or after effects? More education about the vaccine. So this collection of how might we's, you can do it in different ways. So you can even tell the sprint team before they show up for this session that, hey, 2 days before, take some alone time, take some me time, and try to write down as many how might we's as possible individually. So that's another way of saving time in the actual sprint day. When you can ask them to do it as a little bit of homework, then everyone has their time to collect their thoughts, and they don't feel under pressure to do it right away in the session. So
again, Rakesh, just want to understand, we have the long-term goals, we have the pessimistic questions, which is a spread question. then this how might we
Yeah.
is for the overall subject, or it's depend on the sprint question, from that will drive these how might we, how generally.
So you have to keep all components in mind when you're writing them. So
It,
that's
maybe it's narrow down, it's in the funnel.
yeah. So I would that's why I try to keep the problem statement always very close. So you can keep thinking about this and say, okay, this is the problem we are looking at solving, and this is the long-term goal that goes with it. These are the risks that we have, and now let's think of how might we.
So again, I am asking why I'm asking, because right now, whatever the subject is very broad for us,
Yes.
right? And in this subject, we have taken out some sprint question that is make our problem narrower down.
Yes.
Now, if we write the how might we for all the problems, then again, it's going in the broad term, but it's may or may not connected with the sprint question. Is that okay, or do we just want to understand that connection?
No, you're absolutely right. We need to stick to the say the risks that we identified and the sprint questions. So the reason we don't have them here is because we didn't spend the time to vote on them and really identify. So no, you're absolutely right.
I'm just connecting the dots.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. So what could sprint questions be? Maybe we can actually take some of them so that it doesn't.
So the black one, I will copy the.
Yeah, let's just take maybe.
Let me copy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, that's a good selection. Okay, looks like quite a few how might be's there. So I see a couple of categories emerging. Feel free to bring over some of those how might we's and try to position them here. I'll just move these guys a little bit out of the way, so it gives you some space to cluster. All right. So if you're done writing, how might we try to bring the how might we's over under those categories. So for example, I'm bringing this one about trust. Here, if you also feel there are other categories, feel free to create them. Just very quickly. So financial loss is probably socioeconomic impact for me. Integrate a network of people. Could be delivery or engagement. Predict a future pandemic is probably skills. Maybe awareness. So this is again an opportunity where you can get the whole team to do this together. You don't have to wait for one or two people to just do this, or you as the facilitator can just do it while everyone is writing the other post-its. So you can choose whatever works there for you. So maybe I'll create one more category called future proofing. So maybe a beach is here. So this is where, again, as a next step, once you've done this clustering, you need to prioritize. And with prioritizing, you can do that in, again, multiple ways. You can ask people to vote. People can either vote to create a heat map where each one has a large set of votes, and they're just putting as many as possible to give you a very broad overview of how people are thinking. Maybe you can just use that to prioritize these category names. So that's one method. You can do the classic dot voting, otherwise that each participant gets, say, 3 votes, and they have to give them to either one post-it, or they have to, give their votes, exhaust all their votes. And that way you'll see how might we get more prominence, which are the ones that are super important. Or you can also use Miro's inbuilt voting system. So you can even set it up and say, hey, these are the different post-its that I want people to vote on. And this voting can be also done. Good to see that coming up. So you see in the instructions, I've already decided there are 2 levels. So one is on the most promising, how might we questions, you get 8 votes per person. And to vote on the categories or the themes, you only get 1 vote per person. So we want a prioritization on both. So for example, someone might say, hey, data, we might come to the conclusion that data is the most important one there. And the key question to ask there would be, how might we collect the data? Again, I'm just being very wild about this, just in the interest of time. But you might arrive at a point like this where you have a high priority theme or category and a high priority how might we question. And just like Sachin brought the short-term goals or the sprint questions along, So now it's important that you take these two things also along. So remember to take the how might we question and the category along when you're moving through the rest of the sprint activities. Does that clarify the how might we part of things? Any questions on this? Because this is always a very integral part. And if you're doing it for the first time, you might even come up with a lot of other questions.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah, shoot.
How do we do the rating over on the Miro board?
So you can.
Are there any specific tools like sticky notes that, yeah.
Very quickly. So there's one thing that I use. So you can go to the template and you can search for dot. So I'll just say use template. Then if you see, I got these set of dots, these colored dots, and you can assign each color to a specific participant. And you can say, okay, each participant gets 8 voting dots, and they can use this to vote on it.
Awesome. And what about those times that the participants are kind of anonymous? They do not want to.
Then they don't have to declare their name also. So I usually don't ask them to share their name. I just, say just, we can even use a single color and say all the votes are black or all of them are red. It doesn't matter. What matters is you have each one has 8, and that the number is what that matters. Then you don't really need to see who voted and stuff like that. That's one method. The second one is in Miro, you have an inbuilt voting process. So this at the bottom navigation bar, you see this voting thing at the bottom. So just
yes.
that. And you'll see how you can set up the voting. So you can set up the duration, you can set up 8 votes per person. You can choose the voting area, either the whole board, or you can change it and say, hey, no, change it to just this part.
Oh, wow.
And you have to be a bit careful about using this. So if you don't include certain areas, then it ends up not allowing you to vote. So for example, you might have to do two rounds here. So when you're just voting on the how might we's, that's one voting round. And another round could be you then vote only on the categories. So you just select the area that you really want people to vote on. And then you can also say you just want them to vote on the sticky notes and start, or you can even save to vote later.
Wow, this is great. Thank you.
Okay. So that was it with how might we and dot voting. Now you move to the note and map. And here, maybe this is a chance also for you to try it out. Can you take up one of these individual sequences? Think about these first 3 questions. Who's the target user or client that you want to focus on? Where does it begin? And what's the goal that we're trying to reach? Keep the sprint questions in mind. These are the questions that say we started with. I'm gonna bring them along down. So we're here, and we'll take similarly the top voted how might we questions. They're also useful. If you want, you can change the color so that you know what it is. But keep these things in mind and think about what is this journey of a particular user that you're trying to focus on. So we just spoke about a generic citizen. Maybe you decide that it's a citizen in a rural area, or you decide it's a citizen in an urban area, or you say it's a senior citizen, or it's a younger person. Take up one of these boxes and try to create your sequence for that. And let's see if we can quickly bring it over to create a map. Give you some music. So for example, I would do something like youth less than 18 page. I would choose that as a stakeholder, and I want them to be sure they know when to vaccinate, for example. And then you can think about what are the different steps in between. Just to tell you also about these discover, learn, and start using labels on top. So they're just things to help you think through that process. So for example, how does your target user discover this particular topic? And how do they discover that vaccination is important and it needs to be done? Maybe they read an article, maybe they hear something on the radio. How do they learn about it? Then the article or the radio program tells them to go to a certain link, or it sends them a link, or it sends them a video, or maybe they see something very specific which teaches them something about, okay, it helps them understand, oh, what is this about? How can I also avail of this process? And then they start using it. Maybe they need to go sign up somewhere. Maybe they need to share their information, show ID, create a profile. All that stuff happens in the usage phase. So those are markers to help you think through the journey. Yeah, cool. So I see already some of you starting to put that down. Good. Good. Let's take a look at what you've created. For example, there's one teenagers, get to know about the vaccine, don't have knowledge, Google it, get a website, land on the homepage, understand the FAQ, then, understand everything about how vaccines work. Yes, wonderful. There's a vaccine opponent. Yeah, that's a good one. Good choice. News about the pandemic. Yeah, the governmental advertising, print articles. Okay, good, good. That's a good journey to look at. Young adults, students with chronic diseases. Yeah, very good one. Good. So nice to see you people getting the hang of it. So what we would do is, if I can request you, maybe I think Sachin, you wrote one of those sequences, right? Can you please bring it down here to the blue box? Yeah. And we'll try stacking the individual journeys and see if we can build something out of that.
We have to put on the map, blue part?
Yeah. So if you can just copy your journey onto the blue part, more to the right. Yeah, perfect. So there's more here. I think someone's still writing. just going to still copy it over. So that's one more. So Goli has also started one. I'm going to copy it across. So once you have stacked the different individual journeys, what you do is ideally try to understand and agree on the different aspects of this journey. So one is you could do that by voting, and also having a facilitated conversation. So you can vote on, let's say, which is the most important stakeholder to focus on. You can also vote on what's the most important goal that they want to reach. And then once you've fixed that, you can then mix and match these steps and try to get the most extensive or relevant parts of the journey together. And you can do one last step of understanding what's the target that you want to focus on. So you could either say, hey, we want to focus on vaccine opponents or anti-vaxxers, and you want to focus on either the discover phase. Let me bring those things over. Yeah. So you can choose to focus either on the discover phase, the learn phase, or the usage phase, whichever makes sense, whichever is really relevant to your sprint questions and the how might we's that you came up with. So this is a more collaborative way of making the map both individually, giving them the space to do that, and then stacking them and trying to create one map for the whole team. Again, I wouldn't advise trying to do this from scratch because it just takes a lot of time unless you have a lot of time. What always helps is having a first version and then trying to find ways of tweaking it. That's better in the interest of time and also keeping the team's energy together. So, and it's great to have Benedict now. That's very good timing. Thanks for joining us, Benedict. Let me quickly go over and do a quick introduction. Why don't you give us a quick intro there, Benedict? You're the man. Over to you.
Thank you, Rakesh. Yeah, hello, everyone. Best greetings from Berlin also. I'm sitting in Berlin. Rakesh, you too, right?
Yep.
Yes, yeah. So I know Rakesh from a shared summer school, like, wow, by now, I think
it's been a while.
Years ago. Yeah, it's been a while.
True.
And I'm more active, my origin, so to say, is from the field of design thinking. So I went to the HBI School of Design Thinking, originally studied physics and philosophy, and then wanted to do something more with humans, and very successfully found this with design thinking, and was very fascinated, especially with the team aspect. So how to make interdisciplinary teamwork happen and effective, which I haven't seen in a university context before. Yeah. So that was very fascinating to see. And well, I mean, design thinking as design sprints bring with it a lot of different methods, both for process and for mindsets, but also for collaboration. And then afterwards, I also dove a bit deeper into the research side of it. At the HPI in Stanford, in Malaysia, in South Africa, at the different D schools, and also coached there. And yeah, now I am part of a consultancy, transformation consultancy here in Berlin, the Morph company. And we are doing more longer term projects. So we're still also doing trainings because we believe that these methods and capability and mindsets are extremely important in a modern working world, as part of a bigger cultural framework also for organizations and a bigger strategy. Yeah, but it's also great to see quick wins, along the way, And I think one big effect of design methodologies, design thinking, design sprints is also empowerment. So to show you how you can create something in a very condensed way with a good team, diverse team, and then really make something happen instead of planning for years and then not really having anything your user is interested in. So it's a great way of getting into your contact.
I think we have good examples of that in Berlin, the new airport.
Yeah, I think missing user centricity is one of many problems.
Exactly. Sure. No, this is a very good space, Benedict. So I thought I'll start by asking you this question. You started with design thinking, right? So yeah. Do you see two different camps, design thinkers and sprinters? Or do you get this question of like, oh, which is better? Is it design thinking or sprints? How do you answer these questions, or how do you see people approaching these from a practitioner's point of view?
I mean, that definitely changed for me throughout the years, and the more I also learned about the background, also so the psychological mechanisms behind design thinking, and by now I'm very cautious even to say design thinking, because that's put such a prominent label on things. Okay. Also in organizations, people can be like, oh yeah, just another methodology and so on. So in short, I would say I see much more commonalities than differences in all these different agile working methods, which have a certain process underlying, because that's the big thing about agile ways of working. You try to give structure, but at the same time being adaptive. Okay. And the best way to do this is via a process which kind of gives you meta structuring and gives you certain methods for certain phases. And you make clear, like, okay, we are now in a divergent phase, we're now in a convergent phase, but how many bubbles there are, or how many double diamonds, or how they're called, I think that is secondary, at least, if not.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, true. Yeah. I think once you try to connect with what people are actually trying to do, the methods or the other things become more secondary, and it's more the human need that we want to address, or the whatever that need is, whether it's met or unmet.
Exactly.
Yeah. And coming to this today is all about understanding, and more or less the first sprint day where we are trying to set a base and align everyone. What is your approach to this? How do you get people together to converge on a certain problem area, or focus and say, look, these are the questions we'll actually start dealing with? And I think the second part to that is, how do you ensure that there's empathy in the process? For example, the mapping process, I personally have felt many times that it's very difficult to get empathy into that. It becomes challenging sometimes because everyone is trying to defend their own point of view because they've spent a lot of time working in that particular area. This would be very nice to hear from.
Yeah, so I mean, I asked Rakesh about this before as well, like which kind of understand are we talking about here? Because in like the HPI design thinking, for example, we have understand and observe as two different phases. Yeah. And understand really is for the team to get on the same page somehow about what is the broader field we're dealing with, and to get rid of your own associations and prejudices and so on, because every one of us comes, of course, with their own ideas and preformed notions of what we're trying to solve. And of course, we are all human, so we'll all have these prejudices, but you can make them explicit, and you can also, the team comes in there as a very helpful correction, because you can remind each other of, hey, that's something you you are kind of holding on to since the beginning. Why don't you try to let go of this notion and listen to the user, or listen to what other people are saying, in a kind way, of course. But yeah, so the first phase is definitely getting, becoming aware of all the notions we're bringing into the field. And this is kind of the precondition to be able to go out into the field and then observe and do empathy work and user research in an open way. So it's kind of a two-stage process, and I think especially because it's the first phase, a lot about is also the team coming together. So you can also very well use this phase to get to know each other. You know, where are you coming from, like mentally? You know, what are your perspectives on the problem? That's the first user-centered research, so to say, understanding and practicing empathy with your team members.
And what are the usual resistances? How do people push back?
I mean, I think a lot of us are primed to think in solutions right away. Yes. You know, so we hear like, oh, okay, how do we solve COVID in India? Or, you know, like these huge questions, huge questions. And it's like, okay, we need more oxygen, or we need more money, or we need, you know, better distribution. And then people get into fights about, no, this is the problem. No, this is the real problem. Instead of, you know, solving the problems one by one, or, you know, how do you say, divide and conquer. Yeah, so there are a lot of problems in this field, and they are all worth solving, but you really need to zoom in on one and really understand it well to also be able to solve it well and get the people on board that really have the most expertise, which are mostly the people also directly affected by it. So I think that's the pitfall. The biggest pitfall is try to solving everything at once, and being afraid of getting very concrete and very, you know, pointed.
Very narrow,
yeah. Because we're not trained to do that, you know. It's all like think abstract and, you know, see the patterns and whatnot, and that comes in handy as well, but later in the process.
But not in the right place, right? Depending on where it's applied. And for me, from my experience, a lot of corporate teams tend to be always in solution mode. So it takes a lot to tell them that, look, hold on, we are just leaning towards the problem here. We're not yet moving towards solutions at all. So spend some time with the problem, however uncomfortable it might seem like. And this is a challenge, like you say, for most people, because no one has, you know, consciously tried to do a lot of this.
And it also always helps to come back to it. You know, you don't have to get it right, whatever this means, at the first try. You know, that's what design sprints have the process for, what design thinking have its process for. Trust the process. It will always get you into contact with the user again and again and again. And sometimes you only realize in the testing phase or in the validation phase then later what is actually going on. And that's okay. I mean, better late than never. You know, better than holding on to whatever you thought the first solution was.
Okay, wonderful. Maybe this is a nice point to throw open questions to the audience. Would you have any specific questions for Benedict here? Now's your chance.
Yes, please. Hit me.
I have a question. Hi, Benedict.
Hi,
so
Julia.
I'm coming more from the design thinking world as well. And I'm wondering how it fits together, like design sprints with design thinking. And is it correct to assume that what you do in mapping is in design thinking, like the empathize and define phase, or with the HPI approach, the understand, observe, synthesize, and then sketching and deciding is more like brainstorming, and then the rest is the same? Is it correct to say, to match it like that, just to make sense how it fits together? Because I think it's similar, but the steps seem to be described differently.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? That there are so many names and nomenclatures out there. Maybe Rakesh, if I could share my screen, I can
sure.
directly show the.
Let me make you co-host. Just a moment. Yeah, there you go.
Cool. Okay. So so this is the most prominent HPI model, I would say, with the 6 phases, you know, and you see like understand and observe and so on. And in itself, the bubbles don't mean anything, you know. I have to say I find it pretty useless to have these bubbles, but you can see as an overlay here the a double diamond structure as well. And yeah, so understand and observe, I think in the Google or in the design sprints would be the understand phase, you know, diverge, getting a lot of data, going out into the field. Then you define, you bring it down to a point of view, like a concise problem statement. And
that
then
would be the targeting on the map. So for example, you create the map and then you target a certain area and a stakeholder. That would be, for example, defined point of view.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
all
from
of this
my
would
sorry?
be done in the first day, Rakesh. Am I correct? So all of this is done in mapping, but then 4 days you spend on the second diamond. Is that correct to say?
More or less, but there's a lot of decision making that needs to happen between ideation and prototyping. So that's where you spend some time, and finally also the user testing. So it's much more compact and it's more well defined in the sprints, where it says, okay, you have 5 users that you need to test with, and you also need to recruit them. So you will be doing some of those things also in between the bubbles, let's say.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's coming to ideation. What you said, Julia, is absolutely right. So that's always something I also criticize and show in my lectures, for example, that in ideation there's actually another diamond, of course, because you open up, you generate a lot of ideas, and then you already select towards prototyping, and then in prototyping you open up again a little bit. So yeah, so this matches there. And then go towards validation testing. Yeah, that's basically very similar. I think, I mean, I'm not so familiar with design sprints, but from my understanding, design sprints also map out the problem field much more systematically than design thinking does. So design thinking relies more on this inspirational quality of, the one user you meet, and then you're like, okay, this is so interesting. We go all in on this one.
Yep, that's true. I think that it's I wouldn't say the difference, but in the sprints, it's also about working together as a team and exploiting the team dynamics to make sure that everyone is helping you move towards this prototype and test, and everyone is playing an active role there. So,
and maybe another difference, so to say, in design thinking, we do a lot of only nearly qualitative research, so very few quantitative research, because this is like this very, very focused human-centered approach. But I think it's too narrow if you only do qualitative. The surveys are allowed. I always also tell people in design thinking, but they already say that you know something about the problem field already, so you know which are the right questions to ask. So I think always the first step should be at least some qualitative observations and interviews, that you don't just go in designing a survey questionnaire from your desk, without ever being in the field. I think that's time well spent to combine these two, but first to go for a more qualitative approach.
I would also say the same, Benedict, that we retain some of those qualitative research aspects in the sprints, but it's more about keep reducing the overall timeline to very quickly come up with something that you can iterate again. So it's like in the classic version of the design sprint, 5 days, which of course, we know that none of them have in today's context. That's one of the first things that you find out after reading the book when you go talk to someone and say, hey, I need 5 days of your team's time. They're like, no, not happening. Get out. that's your immediate response. And that's when you realize that no one's willing to give you the time, because it's a very different kind of organization. Again, in the startup world, maybe the five days are really seen as, okay, the team can sit together, they can actually invest and do this together. But in other organizations, they don't see it the same way. So there's a lot more convincing that needs to happen there to tell them, okay, we need at least the team to stick together for a limited number of sessions, so that they just don't come in and leave as they please. So that's another aspect there.
No. Or you start even shorter and then get into iteration, because I mean, that's what I always say, like the real work only starts after the first sprint, you know, because then you have a first lay of the land, and then it gets really interesting, because
very much
then you can zoom in on certain things and you have much better idea of what you're actually looking for.
Totally. I mean, this is a great aspect that you're touching on. How do you encourage this culture of experimentation to take root in teams or organizations? Because what I notice is that that's the difficult part. Everyone knows it's difficult, but they also know it needs to be done. But it's difficult. It's tough for them to make that move.
No, yeah, I think that's the general disease of linear thinking. that the world works in a linear fashion, which is definitely not the case. I mean, it's highly complex and highly non-linear in many ways. So yeah, I think it's really helpful to start small. As you say, you know, it's so hard to get people out of their normal everyday routine for 5 days or even 4 days or 3 days. So you can even do a quick sprint in like maybe 1 day. And then you give people some time to, you know, think about it, and then they're like, but I want to go out into the field and ask all these questions I forgot to ask the first time, and you know, get them hooked. But that's why I think it's so important also to always see what you can already, what are the quick ones along the process already that you can already, you know, cash in on and Absolutely. Be like, okay.
No, that's a great point you're making, because I'm also not too much of a purist in this sense, where I'm not religious about saying, oh, we have to do the 5-day sprint, otherwise, you know, there's a no-go. It's always for me also about reading the signals, trying to understand what makes sense, and then proposing to say, okay, maybe we just do 1 session for starters. Let's see what comes out of that. And because most people want to manage their risk better. So if we can show them ways of managing the risk, I think that's already a first nice step there.
Yeah, it's totally legit. This, yeah, Julia.
I have another question. Like, in the mapping, you say that in design sprints you ask experts, right? Whereas in design thinking, you talk more to the stakeholder. Is it just another word for the same, or is it really like in a design sprint, you go talk to industry experts, whereas in design thinking, you go more talk to the people on the street? Is this the same or different? To both of you, the question.
In the sprints, I would say it's just a broader term. I don't like the word experts also. So here in the context of the sprints, it means people with the most knowledge or the closest to the problems that we are trying to work on. And they could be within the sprint team, they could be in different parts of the organization, they could be users, they could be other stakeholders, they could be a mix of all these people.
Yeah. I mean, in design thinking, we firmly believe that the users are the experts, of course, you know, those, and especially that's why I pulled up this slide, the extreme users. So we're not looking for the average user, but we're looking for someone who has strong feelings about this problem, either in a positive or negative way, or someone who already found ways of hacking the problem somehow, or, you know, someone who like says, I'm never ever going to do this again. And these are people who apparently already had like a very intense interaction with the problem field. And this can lead to very interesting findings, which are not just some, you know, washed out average, but really like concise insights. It's like, we like to show this one that we're looking for insights, not for numbers, you know. That's, if you can Google it, it has nothing, you don't need to ask it, you know. So there's a lot of great quantitative research out there which you can rely on and which you can use and which is fine to use, but I think these very personal and very unique insights you only get from talking to people.
Any other questions from the audience?
Anything about empathy work more?
Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
So I mean, to train your observation skills, for example, these kind of peelers, what would you think, who could they be designed for? Or what looks different with them than normal peelers?
I think you have a clear grip. The handle is actually more prominent here. That's my first thing.
Yeah, more prominent handle. Who could this be good for? Yeah,
maybe it's for camping, because you can put something over the sharp side of the.
Okay, yeah.
It looks like locked or decker for me, like the thing above.
Well covered.
They're covered.
Yeah.
Or specific people, like say left-handed people.
Yeah. So absolutely right. These are thicker handles, and they were designed with and for people with arthritis, so which have a hard time gripping. But it turned out that this line by OXO is also super popular with all other people who don't like to grip so hard, like kids, or you know, people who maybe don't train their lower arms all the time, you know, and then to hold such a tiny thing. So they tested with extreme users, people who, you know, have a disease which makes it really hard for them to grip, but actually found great appreciation in the mass market. So that's just one example for how you can also, only because you're testing with extreme users and you talk to extreme users doesn't mean you're going to build a niche product or solution, you know. But it's very good to get this inspiration. Yeah. Also, I have some workarounds I can show you. So so there are different ways of doing empathy work. Like 3 different ways usually we do in design thinking. It's interviews, of course, talking to people, but then also observing people, how they behave in the natural environment, and then also immersion. So trying out what people are dealing with every day yourself. For example, so this is a case study by Lapierre, where they were building bathrooms for the elderly, and one student in the team just accompanied her grandmother through her bathroom routine and noticed that there was always a chair in the bathroom because the woman had to sit down because she couldn't stand up for so long to do her hair, but then everything was too high, you know, and it didn't work out anymore. And she was also always taking the chair out of the bathroom and carrying it in again, because she was a bit ashamed of having to use a chair, and all these like little insights led to like a design of this, you know, stowable chair in a cupboard for the bathroom, for example, and other things. So that's one way of really, you know, looking very closely. Or immersion, the same team also to see how it is like to have old joints. You know, they tape their joints and try to then peel a orange, or what is it here? So there are ways, not only asking other people, but also trying to mimic it yourself, or, you know, sleep at an airport to see what it's really like to spend a lot of time at the airport.
Yeah.
It's a colleague of us. Beautiful workarounds. So, I mean, there are so many smart people out there who already found solutions for things that usually need high tech or are not there yet. So, for example, here this young woman just put a phone in the hijab so she can talk while riding her bike. You know, doesn't need to use her hands and doesn't have to pay for like fancy equipment, AirPods, whatever. Or, I mean, every biker of us knows that, you know, clipping your clipping your trousers so they don't get caught. Beautiful example for good observations. Also, you have this, you know, thousands of dollars designed, highly designed product, MacBook, but then, you know, people put like a piece of paper on there because they don't trust the camera to be off, which is, I mean, such an apparent design flaw. But you don't think about it. So these are all things like this really pays to look for these kind of workarounds. And one of my favorite things also analogies. So trying to find analogous problem situations. So for example, here a team was looking at how to improve the orchestration of the team in a operation room. And I found a really nice analogy, but maybe you guys can also think of one. What would be an interesting analogy? Like many people, crowded space, a lot of time pressure, high risk.
A crowded toilet.
Maybe in a Berlin club, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That was my first visual.
What are they operating on? Yeah. What else are crowded spaces where people are working together and it's like quite hectic?
Maybe in factories.
Yeah, factories. Yeah. Kitchens, for example, could be one. Here they looked at Formula One pit stops, where a lot of people have to work together. You know, it needs to be perfectly orchestrated. If the guy with like the fuel nozzle goes off half a second too early, then everyone blows up. You know, so there's real pressure here. All the tires need to be adjusted perfectly and so on. So and then they looked into, okay, so how are they organizing this, you know? And then they had different colors and different positions and very clear runways and whatnot. And they also used this for the operating rooms, for example. So this also very much pays to look for transfers from other solutions. But for this, of course, you have to abstract a little bit from your concrete problem environment and then see, okay, where else are similar constraints or pressures. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Bennett. It was really impressive. And these are also things that you can encourage sprint teams to do, to connect with users or connect with the problems that they want to work on a little bit more deeply before they come into the sprint. So again, these are things you can suggest based on the context, based on, you know, how you're reading the situation. It's always useful to do some of these things because sometimes it might be possible that the people sitting in the room have never had a chance to actually get up close to the problem and have always been at a certain distance from it. And this helps you put them close to it, or at least try a little bit to understand things a bit more deeper. Yeah. Perfect. Then maybe any last questions, or if not, I'll let you close, Benedict. And anything you'd like to share as the closing words?
Well, if there are any more questions, please. Also from the other ones.
Yeah.
That have been quiet.
Exactly.
To know anything unclear. take the opportunity.
Yeah.
Everyone's happy. When is your next session gonna be?
Next Friday. So
Next Friday.
next Friday is going to be getting into Sketch and Decide. And we'll have Sandy Lamb from Software AG, who's a passionate design sprinter, joining us. And again, we'll go through some of the key activities and exercises for Sketch and Decide and see how it connects with what we did today and how it's also going to move forward. That's the idea for the next session. But yeah, if there are no more questions, then thank you, everyone. Thank you. Big thank you to you, Benedict. Very nice.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
And is there any way people
Both of
can get
you.
in touch with you? If you feel like sharing your LinkedIn or
Of course.
something, pop
Yeah.
that in the chat.
Well, you find me under Benedict Ewald, the Moth Company. I don't know if there's so many others, but you can try my email address. Feel free to also drop me email, put it in the chat. And yeah, I just highly encourage you to get as close to your users as possible and to the field. But still, this is, I think, the cool thing about the analogies. Keep the cognitive flexibility. You know, don't get too tensed up in one thing as a team, and try to also train your flexibility and thinking in other perspectives and other contexts. I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, I think we should also do a separate session on courage in trying out these things also, because there could be huge blocks even in that area to go and try something out, because there's a lot of pressure to get it right. That's a wonderful topic to even dig into.
Exactly, and your team can help you a lot with it. So doing it in a team helps immensely if you're able to encourage each other and create a safe space for experimentation and learning. I think that's worth a lot.
Perfect. On that note, thank you, everyone. Today was the Understand session, and next week, as I said, we'll be looking at Sketch and Decide. Look out for the calendar invite and the Zoom link in that. We'll meet here same time next Friday. Until then, have a nice weekend, and thank you again for joining. Bye.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.